I usually do it until this disappears, and then I go down to the main. And we're going to, sorry, you can watch that. It's the main side. You can move it because. But yeah, you are now being recorded.
Okay, good.
Sorry about the delay.
Alright, looks like we got a full room. Volume okay in the back. Do I need to yell louder? I'll take the silence as a yes. Okay. Here to talk about trolling attackers for fun and profit. Well, mostly for fun. I'm not making any money doing this, but you might save a little money or spend a lot. So break it down into two subjects, network and host, and then take some questions at the end. Got some pretty cool demos for you guys. Not nearly as cool as watching people pop boxes, but hey, blue team's lame. Alright, so who am I? I am Stephen Hosom. I do a lot of network security stuff with Bro and try to automate as much as possible for my employer, Patel Memorial Institute. So why are we going to troll or deceive attackers? What I want to do is maximize the amount of effort that it takes for an attacker to compromise your environment. And yes, that is patch management. Yes, that is making sure that all of your boxes have safe password policies if there were such a thing. But we're also providing a lot of information to attackers that they don't necessarily need. For example, who here knows of Shodan? Good. Would expect pretty much every hand in the room to be up. If you don't know what Shodan is a website where you can go out and browse what is the equivalent of in-map scan results for the internet. I think they're up to about 100 reports now, so it's pretty good data. Who here prevents Shodan from collecting information on your organization? 2 or 3 people. That's more than I actually expected. Why? Why isn't everybody else? Is it good OPSEC to let attackers have that information for free? Shouldn't they at least have to scan it themselves? I just got a lot of information about your organization. I didn't have to do anything. And if I pay $20, I can get way more information because it'll give me banners and SSH information. And nobody here's doing a thing about it. And for the most part, it's fun, and I just like to watch the world burn. So I'm pretty sure that everyone here has seen this report. Vendors have beaten it to death. They've changed the meaning of it. They've pretty much just used it for a ton of marketing value and missed a lot of cool points that they barely touched on, but I'm going to bend it to my will now. In that report, you're probably pretty familiar with what they called the kill chain. But whatever happened to these last couple steps? How many people here run honeypots? Tar pits? Hands go down. Okay, how many people force attackers into those honeypots rather than their normal environment? Oh wait. And I'm not sure I want to talk about this because really that only applies to a few people. Yeah. No. So what's the problem with honeypots? Anybody know? If I'm an attacker and I find out you have a honeypot, why am I going to continue to communicate with it? First of all, I have to choose to attack that honeypot. So we might make it really obvious that it's a good target. Well, a few talks recently, but more and more often we're seeing tactics pop up of how to detect honeypots and steer yourself clear of it. In many cases, we as defenders don't know what looks obviously like a trap to attackers, so we'll set up the most blatant open target we can think of, and then wonder why we're only getting automated scanners to go after it. And even though you've got your honeypot set up, and you're detecting people connecting to it, who's making use of that data and blocking people who actually contacted? Who's doing creative stuff with that data? Anybody actually have a report or block people based on who communicates with honeypot? Why do you run it? In all seriousness, if you're not doing anything with it, then you're spending a lot of effort on just doing something cool. And I'm all for doing cool stuff, but at the end of the day, I have to tell my employer why I'm wasting time doing cool stuff. If you waste a bunch of time and you can't show anything for it, it decreases the amount of cool stuff I get to do. So they can also attack other targets. Just because you have your honeypot there doesn't mean I can't just go attack your production web server once I figure out that I'm wasting time on that. So we're going to talk about our first case. And the first case is network-based deception. So I want to modify or change the network in such a way that it presents bad or useless data to the attackers. We take the case of Shodan. And one of the cool things you can do is, like I'm sure people in the back who raise their hands are doing, is block their IP addresses. But blocking them is not nearly as cool as we could make it. What if we said, Shodan, all of our ports are open and they're all running services that aren't actually running? What if we just fed wrong information to Shodan? Why do I care if they have the right results? Wouldn't it waste more of an attacker's time looking at those results, interpreting them wrongly, and then acting on those results than it would if you just blocked it and they figured, oh, well, there's nothing here, let me go scan myself. Even if we're talking in the magnitude of minutes, it's still more effective. There have been a lot of technical advances in redirecting traffic, and if you're a network guy, I'm really, really sorry. I'm about to make you hurt a lot. We've got BGP flow specification, policy-based routes, and OpenFlow. When we talk about flow spec, what we're talking about is an extension made to BGP under RFC 5575. If you are having trouble sleeping tonight, go on. I've got a link here. If you want to know what it is afterwards, I'm happy to email it to you. But flow specification was actually a pretty lengthy addition to BGP that very few hardware vendors are supporting right now. When you look at hardware that supports it, we're mostly looking at carrier-grade equipment through Cisco and hardware through Juniper. I don't know of other hardware vendors that support it, but what I do know is that BGP with OpenBGP under BSD supports it just fine. So if you want to build your own router at home under BSD and then install OpenBGP, you could totally do that. If you want to do that at work, I think you might get just a little bit of pushback. So look for your standard MX hardware from Juniper, and word is that sometime in the near future Cisco will support it under the ASRs, but who knows when they could support it. I do know that they support it on their carrier-grade equipment, but my guess is if you're here, you probably can't afford that equipment at your workplace. If you can, I'd love to talk to you. Anybody hired? Get it. BGP flow spec supports what is called redirection. There are several actions you can take on it, but basically what it allows you to do is route based on flow rules. So you could say from this source to this destination on this port, even though they're currently connecting to this web server, I've found something about that flow that's bad. So insert a flow spec route, and every time they go to connect to me from here on out, redirect them over here to a honeypot. I've now taken them away from my production environment, provided them a real environment to play in, and said, hey, guess what? This box is responding on all IP addresses, so you may figure it out. But there's not a whole lot you can do about it, because every time you try to connect to a different IP address, you're still getting a honeypot. You can move around as much as you want, but oh well. You can use several different honeypots to do this. One of my favorites is Honeybee. Yes, it hasn't received a patch in a very long time, but it's simple and it just works, which is really all you need. It also allows for a lot of the functionality I'm talking about, such as spinning up a listener for every IP address in Class A. So if you want to listen to a whole Class A, go for it. If you want to create random hosts on that Class A for every other IP address, totally supportable. We also have policy-based routing. There are some tricky pieces with this. The configuration on most firewalls is different. I do know that pfSense and Palo Alto support them. If you have a McAfee firewall, it happens to be one of the old Sidewinders, I think what they're calling just the McAfee firewall now, as opposed to their StoneSoft. I know that that supports it. Once again, it's going to make your network people really not like you if you do this stuff, because now you're taking layer 3 and making it not perform in the way that it's supposed to. You're bypassing the routing table and saying, go over here instead. And sit down and have that conversation on a serious level with your network engineer. They're not going to like you at first. It'll take a little while to actually get them to say, okay to this. So introduce the idea slowly. Within pfSense, you have to make a few modifications to the functionality of it to get it to work under my tolerance levels. And in Palo Alto, it's pretty easy to set up. Unfortunately, Palo Alto is not in the business of giving away free firewalls. So I can't show you that today, but if you talk to me afterwards, I can tell you where to look for and even send you a guide and email that they've released on how to do policy-based routing. And then OpenFlow is the one I know the least amount about. I've never actually worked in an organization that has implemented OpenFlow, but I do know that you can change the destination of flows with OpenFlow. And it's probably going to be way more complex than you really need. I think that at the end of the day, if you want to put this in a production environment, BGP flow spec's your most supportable route. There are some very good open source controllers where you can insert BGP routes. I don't know that OpenFlow has made a lot of ground yet, and I would be wary if I were a network engineer and letting you spin up OpenFlow just for a security product. That seems like a lot of investment. So I've got my first demo for you. What I want to show you is I've got an attacker box, a target machine, a honeypot, a firewall, and Bro IDS listening and acting on traffic automatically. So say that we have an unplugged device from my VM. Say we have an attacker, and all we're going to do is nmap a box, right? It's not a very complex attack, but using things like Bro, you can do this on very complex attacks. For example, there are very good signatures out for shell shock. So when shell shock came out, how many people rushed and lost their minds to patch really fast? Took more than a couple of hours, right? Anybody look to see if they were scanned for shell shock? Anyone do full packet capture and play back their traffic into their IDSs to look to see if they were hit with it? Bet you were. Maybe not successfully, but somebody scanned you. Some curious person in your security organization probably went to that web page where you could scan from the web page, and you at least gave those people information that you were vulnerable to shell shock, which is another funny blue team OPSEC issue. If someone's providing you a free service saying, hey, use my service to scan yourself for shell shock, don't do it. You just told them, I think I'm vulnerable, followed by confirming it for them. It's a great way to limit the scope of your worldwide nmap scan for shell shock. So let's go ahead and scan the target machine. If you go here, you open the real CD. 152, 128. Okay, I am going to get real results back from this nmap scan. I will not lie, you'll get real results in the first scan with this because of a limitation in pfSense. So what this is currently doing is it's nmap scanning, but I'm also running a Bro network monitor on this. So when it detects the scan, it's going to shoot the IP address over to a file that's served up on a web page, and then pfSense periodically downloads that file and installs it into an ACL that redirects using policy-based routing. Problem with that is that pfSense only supports downloading that list once a day. Not really living up to my expectations there. So I wrote a small patch and scheduled a cron job, and now it does it once every 15 seconds. If you happen to use pfSense, I'll provide that to you, but I'm not going to support it. So if you break your production environment and you're using pfSense, I'm sorry ahead of time. We want to take a look at the ACL for pfSense. Ooh. Yay, demo gods. Let's try. Okay. The web interface is done for this, so I'm just going to bounce the box. What you should see when this network scan is done is that the pfSense will automatically pick up that file and load it into the ACL with its block list functionality. The block list is not set to remove things within pfSense. Basically, what you have to do to remove things out of pfSense's block list is remove them from the file that it's downloading. Every time it downloads the file, it reloads it. And getting that to work properly can sometimes be a little rough. So while we're waiting on the firewall to reboot, let's talk about what the problems are with doing this. With BGP flow spec, what happens when you load too many flow-based rules and you're routing on them in your ASR? ASRs aren't really meant to do traffic redirection with your flow-based rules, and it's not doing it in hardware, which means that you can quickly crop out your ASR. You can do the same thing with your MX series box with Juniper, and then there are other problems when you get into policy-based routing. But to get around those problems, the name of the game is just limit how much traffic you're redirecting. So if you attack me today, maybe I'll start out redirecting you for 15 minutes, and then 20 minutes, and then a half hour, and so on and so forth, until I've baselined that, you know what, these are people that we're pretty much always going to block. And yes, we are basing it on IP addresses, which are easy to change, but you're getting valid scan results back anyway. Well, sort of valid scan results back anyways. It's going to take you at least a little while if you're automated to figure out that I'm not providing you an environment to scan if you ever do figure it out. The problem that I frequently run into with using policy-based routing is that firewalls have state tables. And those state tables can get full. If your firewall state table becomes full while you're running an nmap scan through it and redirecting traffic, you just crash your production environment. So I'm not saying that this comes without hazards. I'm just saying that you need to be aware of those hazards because you can work around that. First of all, don't use policy-based authority if you can stay away from that game. You're going to run into problems with state tables, simultaneous connections open, especially if you're doing things like proxying. If you proxy connections, someone can now crash your proxy. It takes very little effort to have a firewall block traffic because it's not setting up state for that. But if you're now allowing all of that scan traffic to go through, things that previously weren't crashing your environment could. I'm starting to wonder if my network's in. About halfway through. Okay, let's see if we can take a look at the. Okay, so you can see that as I've been scanning with Nmap and unsuccessfully getting to the firewall, I've gone ahead and added the IP address of my attack box 3 times to the ACL, or to the block list that BSides is downloading. And while I can't get to the web interface, the only networks that I have set up in VMware are available right here. So we've got .235, .152, .196, and .193. 193 is technically inaccessible from this VM. So what happens if we scan? That's going to take a really long time and crash the firewall. So we'll just scan .10. It'll take a really long time because what I've told the honeypot to do, if you're not familiar with HoneyDrive, it's pretty easy to set up. Wouldn't advocate it in a production environment, but it's like a security onion of honeypots. So you can quickly set up Dianea, HoneyD, 2 or 3 other honeypots like Conpot, and play around with them so you get a feel for whether or not you like them, and then build your own installation that you trust and you manage that you can then use in your production environment. So we go to the honeypot logs. And we tail honeyD log. You can see that I am currently scanning the 225.10 address, and it is responding. So the attacker is under the impression that 225.10 exists as a real host and is responding on all ports. You have no more information about my environment now than you had 3 seconds ago. Now, depending on how devious you want to get with this, you can do things like spin up real mail servers and accept mail and set your window size just small enough, but not too small. Window size 0 really doesn't work all that much. People have caught on to it a little. But window size 3, that'll work. I can control how many characters you can send that SMTP server, and it's really not costing me all that many resources, because if the honeypot fails and doesn't keep up, then what do I care, right? The firewall crashing on the other end I do care about, so be careful with that. Do this with BGP. In all seriousness, if you're going to do this in your production environment, do it with BGP. BGP will stand up a lot longer than your firewall that's actually tracking session state. If you have a really overpowered Palo Alto 5000 unit, you might be able to get it done. Be careful how long that ACL gets if things are redirecting. Maybe add into your code a clause that says if it hits any number of IP addresses, then first in, first out them. I have lots of ideas for how you can fix those problems, but the best option is to use BGP and just monitor the activity of monitor the CPU and resources of your ASR or your MX box and make sure that's not getting overloaded. Because the number of rules we're talking about is in the thousands. It's not 3 rules, it's 1 to 5,000. Realistically, you shouldn't be redirecting 1 to 5,000 addresses at the same point in time if you're doing this properly. Because we only need to redirect the traffic so long as you're talking to me. So if you communicate with me, I determine you're bad, I ship you over there. Once I find that you know I'm communicating with me, I can take you out of that resource pool to mishandle someone else. And we'll do one last check to see if this is okay. If you actually want to see the setup in BSides and and you are a pfSense user, maybe you want to set it up at home, let me know afterwards. I'll walk you through how to set it up, but I'm not going to waste everyone's time sitting here fiddling with pfSense to get the web interface to work again. Demo works pretty well. Let's move on to host-based deception. So we talked about the network and the network team and how we can make them angry. Once I've finished abusing layer 3 in your environment, I'd like to move on to the hosts. So on the hosts, once they've been compromised, we leave open a lot of administrative tools that users in their day-to-day lives don't need, or functionality on the host that users in their day-to-day lives don't need. And I'm passing widespread judgment there. So I'm saying you as a user don't need access to X, Y, or Z tool. What I can tell you is that with all of the technology that we have, it is possible to make any use case work for every user. It's just a matter of how much effort you're willing to put into these deception techniques, and if they really work out for you, that's great. The host-based stuff is the stuff that I put the least amount of thought into. So if you have any feedback, that'd be awesome. Because I'm definitely a network guy and not really focused entirely on the endpoints. So I want to make modifications to the host to confuse or mislead the attacker and still preserve a usable interface for the user. So I want to use your workstation as a live honeypot. Once someone is in and interacting with it, I want to make sure that the weird stuff that an attacker is doing on it, we can alert based off of that, and then using our layer 3 shenanigans, isolate your box and give you a full environment to play in that looks like my production environment. So maybe once I've determined that someone is on your box and doing something bad, I give them access to DNS servers and fake domain controllers, half a dozen other things that they can interact with, exploit, own, carry away fake data on, and honey files that then report back where they went to. But the attacker is, either they catch on and they give up, which is cool, I'm fine with that, that's a really good result for me, or they don't catch on and I eat into their time and they go, wow, and now that I figured that out, I really don't want to attack them again because I could spend 3 days in a honeypot. 3 days is a little ambitious, an hour maybe, but it's an hour they're not attacking my stuff. So how do you deceive attackers without impacting users? Let's talk about replacing system binaries. So anybody know what the net user command is, or just the net command suite in general? How many people think users actually use those commands? I, as a user, use them. One of the first things I do when I'm hired is I use it to crawl your domain. I want to know the kind of security you have in place and whether or not I can use them to perform reconnaissance on your domain. If I can, why can't I? Do you have file shares set up that when I connect to them, they report back and say, hey, someone connected to me, but no one's ever supposed to connect to that file share? No? Why not? You all have corporate Windows licenses. What's another file share? $500? That falls under discretionary fund in most places. So we can replace net user. If you're a really, really, really good programmer, you can tackle the idea of replacing PowerShell or cmd.exe. The reason I say if you're a really, really, really good programmer is that hooking standard in, standard out of PowerShell or CMD, not a trivial task. I tried in about a half hour to an hour last week. Decided that rather than do that, I'd rather just emulate a command prompt and then return garbage back every time they type a command. Making small modifications to that, we could log it and send it to a remote server, which would be interesting. Someone uses the cmd.exe in its default location, and then they type in a bunch of net user commands and they get false information about the domain back. Like, here's the list of domain admins that don't actually exist. Here's the list of user accounts on this machine that don't actually exist. There are other ways to find this information in the hardware. or in the operating system. But by and large, the stuff that I see takes advantage of the easy stuff to use in Windows. And I have run into quite a few pieces of malware. Now, some of it's really good, and it doesn't, and it does the Win32 API calls to look for that stuff itself. But I'm not trying to stop way up here. If you're actually what people, well, first of all, if you're what the media considers to be an advanced persistence threat, then I have already caught you doing this stuff. If you're a 14-year-old kid and you broke into my environment, this stuff caught you. If you're a nation state, then you're going to get into that. I can't do anything about that. If you can do stuff that's cool about that, then let's talk. So, in replacing CMD and NetUser, we can log commands that are made. We can return entirely false responses, which is kind of fun because then they start looking for things that don't exist. As they're looking for things that don't exist, you write network signatures to detect people trying to connect to those things. You throw them back into the honeypot. This is a system that continues to grow and spiral out of control. And then you send logs to a central server. Why do you send logs to a central server? Exactly. So the problem with using host-based forensics is that once you've determined that that box is compromised, how much can you trust it? None. Probably can't trust it before it was compromised, but that's an entirely different subject. You definitely can't trust it now. You definitely can't trust the logs that are on it because the logs can be modified, rewritten, erased. They're no good. Send the logs off the system. I at least have some level of belief that unless they have intercepted the log on its way out of the PC, that it's safe. Now, when I write network communications with custom-built apps like this, I like to do funny stuff. I will start out by using TLS encryption, and then I will do a Diffie Hellman key exchange inside of that, and then I will do PGP encrypted messages inside of that. So if you'd like to spend, as an attacker, all day long traversing all three layers of that, cool. You intercepted my logs, but I think I won because you just spent a day of your time screwing with my stuff. I have a small binary that replaces CMD, and it just returns garbage every single time you try to type a command. It's about 30 lines of code in Go. If you're not familiar with Go, it's pretty fun to use to replace system binaries like CMD or net. The reason that I like it is that it pushes out just a single binary that links to absolutely nothing. It means that you can push it out with SCCM rather easily. But before you push out a binary that replaces net or CMD in your environment, you might want to test to make sure that doesn't break your stuff internally. I wouldn't put it past Microsoft or even your Windows admins to use those commands inside of a script. You'll want to make sure they modify those scripts to update the location where you're going to move those binaries to. My recommendation is when you replace the system binaries, you don't actually remove them from the host. You move them to a separate directory, and then you use something like AppLocker, which is built into Windows and comes with the licensing you already pay for, to limit the NT groups that are allowed to access those binaries. You can do that based on hash, you can do it based on code signing cert. Careful with the code signing cert. I would bet that if you block everything from code signing cert from Microsoft, it's going to break more than a couple of things in your environment. And you can do it based on path. Careful using path because frequently what we will see in malware is that attackers will drop their own version of cmd.exe, hook standard in, standard out, and start pumping data back and forth between that in a temporary directory. So if you blacklist based on path, then you're leaving yourself open to allowing that attacker to drop their own binary on there once you've already started intercepting their commands. I don't see people circumventing things like this with that. I just see them doing that by default. So if you were to blacklist cmd.exe, you've broken part of their C2 infrastructure. Now they have to write code to replace that. All for making them spend more time to break into my stuff. So, the application that I've written is here. Looks like a normal command prompt, but if you that's odd.
Where did you find the shell?
It's a really cool shell, isn't it?
Yeah.
Don't know how that got changed from duplicate to giraffe, but that's cool. So here is this command shell that returns garbage. Like I said, 30 lines in Go, not a terribly large amount of effort, but obviously not going to keep me contained for long. I'm going to notice that none of the commands I'm used to using are available, and if something's up, so I'm going to disconnect and go on to something else, maybe pick a different target. But now I have to compromise something else or make modifications in this system to make it usable for my uses. If you're into tuning app blocker or making that work, I'm not a Windows admin, but I can tell you how to break your systems. So I can point you in the right direction to break your own stuff and make it work in your environment, because anytime you work with application whitelisting or blacklisting, regardless of what any vendor tells you, it's not a 10-minute setup. You can't just click a button and make it go. You're not going to learn your environment. You're going to break stuff and then fix it, and it'll work. Wouldn't advocate whitelisting. I think that attackers are probably going to find a way no matter what if you do whitelisting. But if you blacklist a few select files, once they are in, you can make their life a living. All right. So we have just a few minutes left, 15 minutes. I have this time set aside for questions and relaying my contact information, so we'll start to open it up for questions. Yes?
Can you talk to latency and performance on the network side of the house as you begin building large blacklists or large lists like things like that?
The latency is mostly going to be introduced by the new flow rules in your. So are we talking firewall or BGP?
Yeah.
Okay. Way more latency with the firewall once you hit the top end of the flow tracking for that firewall. So say your firewall is rated for 256,000 flows. Once you start getting to the top end of that, everything just goes to hell and high. BGP is going to be pretty similar, but you're going to be able to measure that, I think, a little bit easier. I don't think you're going to notice a significant amount of latency up until you hit the point of, hey, everything's bad, and then the impact becomes logarithmic.
Have you looked at the Mirage project at all?
I have seen a little bit about Mirage.
Okay, the reason I bring it up is they did a bunch of work on replicating command shells and commands, making it look and behave like an actual system when it's not, so you might want to steal some of it.
Yeah, I'm all for stealing code.
Or contribute and roll it into yours, one of those two.
I mean, by no means is anything up here production ready and something that I would willingly distribute to you guys and say use in production. But if you'd like to use what I am calling proof of concept code to define what you want to use, cool. Mirage did look like a really cool project when I looked at it. I'll have to go back and look at the command line stuff.
Cool.
Other questions? Cool. Seems like I was pretty informative. If anything else pops up throughout the day, don't be afraid to come over and chat. If you have cool ideas, I'd love to hear them. Since we're ending a little early, I guess I'll give you back part of your day.